As pastor of Dolores Mission Church, which at the time was the poorest parish in the Los Angeles Catholic Archdiocese, Father Boyle and members of the parish began working to help at-risk youth, starting an alternative school and daycare program, and finding jobs for former gang members. A few years later, they opened Homeboy Bakery as a training ground for former gang members to achieve gainful employment. Today, Homeboy Industries operates a number of social enterprise businesses. I was saying to Greg, I was in Los Angeles Airport a few weeks ago, and bingo, I looked up, and there is a Homeboy Industries in the airport. And they help about 10,000 former gang members a year, providing job training and placement along with education, therapy, tattoo removal, substance abuse treatment, and legal assistance. Father Boyle is author of the celebrated memoir, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, published in 2010. He's received the Civic Medal of Honor, the California Peace Prize, and in 2011 was inducted into the California Hall of Fame. He also received an honorary degree from our own College of the Holy Cross back in Homeboy's infancy in 1998. Father Boyle's here with two trainees from the program, Ruben Ruiz and David Vasquez, who also will share a bit about their experiences. So I'm really grateful that they've joined us tonight and are eager to hear what all three of our speakers have learned from each other. Father G, as he's known, is a fantastic storyteller and can do much better than I can, so I am going to leave it to him and to David and Ruiz and Ruben. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
My name is David. I'm 20 years old. I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here and how I got here today. It all started off at the age 12, and a little bit before that. My mom was in and out of prison, so she kind of left me at what is known as a dope house. So my grandma that lived there, she was like addicted to heroin. So she really didn't pay attention too much, So I always was with my cousins and the homies and stuff, and kind of got used to seeing homies getting jumped into the hood in the backyard every day, houses getting raided all the time. It became like it became the cool thing to see. I started becoming proud of all that, and wanting to be all that, as time grew. So at the age of 13, I found myself in juvenile hall for the first time, and actually representing the neighborhood. So as I got out, I got jumped into the hood right away, and from there on, that led to years and years of in and out of juvenile hall camps, placements. It got to the point where I had nowhere to go. I was underage, nowhere to go. The house ended up, I guess, I don't know if the state or whatever, they ended up closing the house down, so everybody just left. So I was out in the streets and nowhere to go. My mom was in and out of prison. No one wanted me around because I was already doing drugs at the age of 15. So my aunt told me one day, oh, you can come live with me, just if you agree to go get your tattoos removed at this place called Homeboys. So I agreed to it, like, yeah, I need a place to live, So I would go, and I was ready to develop a little routine where I was in the hood every day, I'll take a train, whatever I got to do to go to the hood. So every month she'll tell me, hey, it's time to go get your tattoos removed, and there I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna go get my sweater, and I'll be hopping the back wall and I'm gone, So after that, I went back to juvenile hall, and I did that for more years, and I lost a lot of time, I dropped out of school at the 5th grade, so never had an education really. And then I finally hit 18, and that's when things got really real, because here I am, I'm not that big of a person, so I go into the county for the first time for a little violation, and I'm seeing all these grown men, and things got real because that violation turned into an armed robbery and hit and run, and it went from a month to 30 years that I was facing. So I stood there and for a whole year, and I waited and waited until I finally beat the case by the grace of God. I got out and stood there and learned my lesson. I got my girlfriend pregnant, so I was still out there doing drugs, gang banging, wouldn't listen to nobody. It got to the point where I was in jail again. So when I finally got out, my baby was born, and I think that's really what changed me, because when I looked into my baby's eyes, everything just unraveled, in me, and suddenly I can feel all the pain and hurt to all the people that I've hurt and all the things that I've done out there, and all the wasted time I did with my life, because suddenly now I'm looking into the baby's eyes, and I'm looking at all the things and stuff that are happening out in the streets, and I didn't want my daughter to go through that, so I was faced with a decision to make, either hit the streets again or change my life and be in my daughter's life, So I told my family, I know a place that can help me, and it was Homeboy Industries. And I wasn't really all there, kind of, I was still like, cool and hot. So when I went into Homeboys, I really didn't know what to expect. So when I went in there, Father G opened his arms and, welcomed me with open arms. And ever since then, I've been doing tattoo removal classes. I've seen things that I never thought I would see. I don't miss the lifestyle. I don't miss drugs. I don't miss having nowhere to go all day and night. I don't miss hurting people. I don't miss going in and out of jail. I'm happy where I'm at now. So and plus now I'm here at you guys' beautiful city and state, and I thought I would never be here. So yeah, life's good now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruben Ruiz. I'm 23 years old. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. I grew up with parents that were very, very active, gang active. My mom was a drug user herself, real meth addict, talking about sniffing lines, falling in love with the needle, stuff like that. I was what they call they were pretty much seen it, as a kid, not Elmo or Sesame Street or playing with toys, and my mom telling me, showing me my colors. I wasn't taught to that. I was taught to that rough love, that what they call gangster love, that you're gonna be tough in the street. You're not gonna let nobody put you down. And it was that was that cycle that they brought me into, that I saw, and I chose that lifestyle. My dad, another drug addict as well. He was a real coke addict at the time. Now he's just doing very bad. Right now he's facing 10 years in prison right now. My mom, I haven't spoke to my mom since I joined Homeboy Industries. For so many reasons. I'll get into details with that later on. I was 13 years old when I first joined the neighborhood. I first wanted to be from my mom's neighborhood for some reason. I don't know why. I was closer to my mom, I guess. She told me no, she said, no, you're fucking crazy, get out of here. I said, all right, I'm gonna go get my dad. So I told my dad the next day. The very next day, I didn't even wait 24 hours. I'm ready to get in the hood, And he's like, for what? And bullshit you not, once he said those words, there's a car passing by, shooting at us. At 13 years old, getting shot at. I just remember my dad pushing me to the ground, not even carrying me or covering me for these bullets coming after me, you know? Just pushing me and him diving the other way. And good thing they didn't get off or nothing, but that day, I chose to gangbang. That day, that was my reason. I told my dad, I'm not gonna, they don't care about my life, then why should I care about other people's lives? So there it goes. A couple minutes later, I'm over there in the back getting jumped by 3 guys. As what we do as gangbangers, we go for revenge. So there goes me as a knucklehead, already mad, back to the streets. You know, it's something I regret. Then a couple years passed, got really active, started carrying weapons on me, picked up a gun case. That gun case I did 6 months, 5 months. Didn't do that much time in county jail. I never had camp, only county jail. Then got out, became a real big addicted to drugs, got into meth, what they call glass. Started doing glass, got to that cycle again, see my mom, see my dad getting high. So to me, it wasn't like I was doing something wrong. It was just, I was born to it, you know, I was immune to it, that negativity. So to me, it was like whatever, everybody's doing it, everybody's getting high in the street, up to no good, running amok. So to me, it wasn't nothing bad. But I was just getting tired of that cycle, and then, I don't know, for some reason I was really high one day, and there it goes, packing another gun, and I caught my other gun case. And this one, I don't know, I just had a bad experience in jail in this one. I just constantly getting down in jail, back to back to back with enemies. I don't know, for some reason, I guess my enemies were getting busted at the same time I was busted. So I was just running amok in there. And then I hit Supermax County Jail by Six Flags Magic Mountain in California. And we're all in there, high-level inmates, and I'm over here shaking my enemy's hand, and it hit me right there. In jail, there's rules that you can't fight an enemy because we're all one race. The Mexican stays with the Mexicans, the whites with the whites, the black with the blacks. So I'm shaking my enemy's hand, and it hit me like we're shooting at each other in the street, but in here we're shaking hands and we're coming united as one. Why is that? You know, I asked myself why. And right there I was just like, this is it. This is where they call me Toro. This is bull. This is where I end. I'm gonna drop the ball here. I'm gonna hang my gloves, what they say. There I go, getting out a couple months later with probation and a 2-year joint suspension. So I'm on probation now with a 2-year joint suspension hanging over my head. So if I get busted again, I'm doing 2 years off the back. So I go look for help, and my aunt told me about Homeboy Industries. Once I walked through that door, I already knew I wanted to change just by being in jail. So once I walked through those doors, meeting Father Greg, I seen all these gangsters, right? I was like, everyone still looks active here, like. But now I started seeing other gang members, my enemies, introducing themselves, you know, like, oh, what's up, with their real name, not their hood name, not their nickname, with their real name, like humans do, you know, like. I'm over here seeing his hood in his face, and I'm shaking his hand, and he didn't bother where I was from. He didn't, what they call you, fool, you know, nothing like that. It was, hey, what's up, my name is woo. All right, what are you here for? I'm here to see Father Greg, okay? So, whatever, I was waiting in line to see G, and I guess that was I think the best thing ever, speaking to Father G. I think that was a angel sent from above, you know. It was a blessing speaking to this man. Didn't hesitate once when I asked him I needed a job. Opened arms, hugged me, gave me money right off the bat. Put food on my table that same day. It's crazy, you know. I just realized it now, and it's a blessing. Now I got a job because of Homeboy Industries. Sober now. I've been sober for the past 4 months. Doesn't seem a lot, but for me to be running amok out there and being dirty for 3-4 years straight, it's a blessing. I just learned a lot from Homeboy Industries, how to love myself, how to love another gang member, be friends with others, respect, getting over fears that I had. What else? Getting my tattoos removed off my choice, not because they expect it. No, it's because I want to. I got my neck almost done. I'm a student at ELAC, East LA College. I never thought I'd be a college student. Trying to major in business, join the football team. It's just crazy how these blessings come so quick and how God puts things in line. And I just want to say thank you, Father, for everything. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if this works. Yeah. Get my Madonna microphone on here. Probably dating myself. I don't know. Got it. So, thank you, you two. It's a privilege to be with all of you. I'm honored to be traveling here with these two gentlemen. The day won't ever come when I have more courage or I am more noble or I'm closer to God than David and Ruben. We've had a good time. This was David's first airplane flight, and Ruben, only your second one, right? Yeah, so but it's a great thing. So I'm happy to be here at, I guess it's my alma mater because I got an honorary degree here many years ago, so. I just know I'm an alma mater because I get the development letters, you know, asking for money and stuff. So I know I've arrived at some level. It's a privilege of my life for 30 years to have worked and know thousands and thousands of gang members, men and women, who have changed my life and altered my heart. And there's a homie named Joey Ray who worked at our place some time ago, and he part of what he did was he would go on the road and he would give talks, and he was a good speaker. And we went up to dinner. He was giving me tips on how to speak publicly, and he said, you know, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That's some good advice there. You know, we're always celebrating our common invitation and call to go to the margins because that's where the joy is. So it's a kind of a selfish venture. But if you go to the margins and if you stand there long enough, you look under your feet and the margins are getting erased because you chose to go there. And this is certainly something that Pope Francis is always inviting us to to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So we're all called in our way to dismantle the barriers that exclude, to stand and inch our way closer to the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And all of us feel this particular privilege of being able to stand occasionally with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And to that end, we're all called to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And the only reason we want to do that is because we discover, in the same way that Jesus, in his own mysticism, knows the kind of God he has, and knows that God's dream come true is that we be one. So it's important to kind of, as St. Ignatius talks of the God who's always greater, to know this God who loves us without measure and without regret, the God who's too busy loving us to have any time left to be disappointed in us. I had a spiritual director for a time who used to always say, we need a better God than the one we have, which I think is actually quite true. Otherwise, arrested development could probably describe where we are with God. Most of the time, we fall into these patterns and fifth grade senses of how God sees us, how God is eternally disappointed in us, and how God, how somehow we don't measure up, and so how do we move beyond that place? And the homies are always teaching me how to kind of find this spacious and expansive and the sense of God, the God that Jesus knew. I always talk about how the homies have kind of out Yogi Berra, so they're always kind of mangling the English language in a way that I find always very illuminating, not just charming and affectionate, and much the same way you would tell stories about your kids, how they sort of charm you and make you laugh. But they're always mangling sort of the English language. I had a homegirl named Lisa come into my office, and she was wanted to introduce her man to me, and so she was standing with him in front of my desk, and she said, "This is my sufficient other." I said, "No doubt." I just had dinner. We had dinner with some students here, and we were talking about kind of who's going to take over Homeboy. And so it's nice that the homies have sort of taken it over. But I also have a CEO named Tom Voso who runs the place, and it's nice. I don't have to worry about, in the same way, about cash flow and budgets and stuff. But so it's nice to have him in charge. And I had a homie come into my office, and he said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." And I said, "Well, I just ended mine, so I kind of know what she's going through." But my favorite one happened when I was at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and I was saying Mass in this huge gym, and there were probably 300 kids there, and mainly male, and almost all gang members. And, as a presider, I was wearing my album, my stole, and they have these little sheets that have the readings in English and Spanish. So I thought, well, I'm going to close my eyes and listen to the reading. So I put this little sheet on my lap, and this homie gets up, and it's the Psalm. And he says, with kind of an overabundance of confidence, I think, he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I go, "What the hell?" And I look at the sheet, and it said, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Yeah, no, I really do prefer the exhausted God over the exalted one, because even if you kind of think about the words themselves, exalted is high, distant, glorified, but really far out of our reach. And then there's exhausted, which is about kind of self-emptying, about sort of, everything for you. I like that way better. Because we're endlessly creating God in our own image, and that's exactly the problem. It's where we get arrested in our development. Anne Lamott says that you've created God in your own image when God hates all the same people you do, And I think that's quite right. We're human beings, we can't help ourselves, but we can catch ourselves, and that's what we want to do. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to stand out at the margins. So we have this original covenantal relationship where God says, as I have loved you, and the God we've created in our own image expects God to say, love me back, But the God we have is the one that says, as I have loved you, have a special love, special care for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And the reason God says this is because God thinks that these are folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered this particular pain, God thinks they're trustworthy to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. Well, that's a whole new thing. We don't go to the widow, orphan, and stranger to save them, rescue them, but quite the opposite, to somehow find our own salvation. Or as John Sobrino, a Jesuit liberation theologian in Salvador, wrote provocatively a book entitled No Salvation Outside the Poor. I know exactly what he means. These are our guides, and they are trustworthy, God says. It's not a romanticizing of the poor. It's about knowing how people will lead us to the truth of who we are. So service is good, and I know Holy Cross engages quite a bit in this, and yet, we want to be able to somehow bridge the distance that exists between us, How do we move from separate and superior to connected and compassionate? How do we move from service provider and service recipient, this distance? How do we bridge that? At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and these guys over here are in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's what joins us together as human beings, as members of this human family. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he's the best listener I ever knew in my life. He never took his focus off you. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if there was someone more important on the approach. But once famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual, which of course is where we want to be, in this exquisite mutuality where there is no distance. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom, and the ballroom is God's dream come true, which is kinship, connection. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? So we arrive at some place of kinship. No homie ever found more job opportunities at Homeboy Industries than a guy named Dreamer, and I knew him from the housing projects, Pico Gardens. A little mocosito, 13 years old, like these guys, got into a gang around that time. Older brothers from that same gang, and super smart kid, very intelligent, with the most dangerous sense of humor of anybody I've ever known. Though I don't think he ever went to school much, but he's about 40, in his 40s now, but in his early 20s, he was kind of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. And he would, I'd find him a job in the private sector or in, one of our businesses. And before too long, he'd sort of unravel. He'd gravitate toward vague criminality, usually something involving drugs. the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me, and it was a pattern that kept repeating itself. So this one time he finished a 4-month probation violation, county jail, and there he is sitting in front of my desk, and he says what homies often say, "This time it'll be different." I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company, and this guy had hired homies, in the past. So I'm thinking maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he says, "Hey, you tell him he can show up tomorrow. He can start tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is in front of my desk. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go all over again." But this time he pulls out of his pocket his very first paycheck, and he waves it proudly. And he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, Gus, who?" And he looked at me strangely, and he said, "Well, God, of course, And I said, "Oh, no, sure. No, that's right. That would be God, yeah." He said, "You thought I was going to say you." I said, "No, gosh, God's number one." He said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." And I'm sorry, them Genesis days? And he goes, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now," he said. Well, I guess he told me, but we just fell out of our chairs. We died laughing, and I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So we're called to create this thing that is the only praise that God has any interest in, which is somehow creating this bond with each other, this connection. And the homies have taught me everything of value in terms of it. In the last few years, they've taught me how to text, and so I'm so grateful to them, because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, "Oh, hell no," which I've been using quite a bit lately. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this audience who's vexed by this stupid autocorrect thing. I had a homie just write me the other day. I didn't know him, and he got my number from somebody, and he was texting, and very formal, and asking for some help. He had just gotten out of prison, and he began his little message to me. He wanted to write Father Greg, and then I guess autocorrect helped him, and it said instead, Fat Boy Greg. So at least I think he was trying to say Father Greg, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. Once I had a homegirl named Bertha, and she was on a Sunday, and she said, "Where are you at?" I text her back, "Well, I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas," and monjas is Spanish for nuns, sisters. About to speak to a room full of monjas. So I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which he, thought was pretty interesting. But more often than not, homies, their hair is on fire, and they're always asking for money, and they're going to cut off my lights, and I just need this much more for my rent, and that's endless. And so homie wrote and needed help with his rent. I didn't have any money at all, so I just wrote him, "Things are tight." I pushed send. Autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote back, "Sorry to hear that." What about my rent? So I'm in a car with two older vatos, homies who work at the office, Manuel and Poncho, and they're gonna help me give a talk at a high school. And so we're, Manuel's in the front seat. We're driving, 15 minutes on the road when Manuel gets an incoming, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I had just seen Snoopy. He greeted me as the day began, and Snoopy and Manuel worked together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers. It's a job I wouldn't want because this may come as a surprise, but gang members can be attitudinal occasionally. So they're braver men than I am. And I said, well, what'd he say? Well, it's dumb. Hang on. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing. I almost drove into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? Homeboy Industries was started in 1988 when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, making it the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere in the world was my parish. I buried my first young person in 1988, and I buried my 217th 3 weeks ago. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members, so I get asked to do this. First thing we did was we started a school, because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. So they were violent and wreaking havoc during school hours and writing on the walls and selling drugs. So I walked out to them and I said, hey, and I'd isolate them. You know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that sort of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8. First 2 floors was the parochial school, and the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns in the living room, and I sat them down, and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they said, sure. And so we were off and running. So that brought gang members to the church, which created this disconnect in the parish. You know, initially anyway, people started to say, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And that was a good challenge, a gospel challenge. And then they said if only we had jobs, and so myself and the women, we marched around the housing projects, the factories that surrounded the projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just invented things, a crew to build a child care center made up of enemies, rivals, graffiti removal crew, maintenance crew, landscaping crew. We had 60 all working. Then the unrest happened in 1992 in Los Angeles. The whole city exploded, but not this little pocket of the poor in Los Angeles. So the LA Times asked me, why do you think that was? And I said, I think it's because we had 60 strategically hired gang members, enemies, rivals, working together, had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to ignite the place at night. So a movie producer with $500 million read this article, summoned me. I'm giving you the cliff notes here. And so he said, what should I do with my money? And I said, well, buy this abandoned bakery across the street from the church. It has ovens. We'll put hairnets on gang members. They'll bake bread. We'll call it Homeboy Bakery. And that was the extent of my business plan. And he said, sure. So we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. Not everything worked. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. Nobody ever intends to do something like this, but you back your way, you evolve your way into becoming, we're now the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. We didn't intend to do that, but it sort of happened. There are 120,000 gang members in LA County. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to imagine their life in a different way. Most of the homies want to be part of this 18-month training program. And because it's a paid gig. And so, and then they get in and we always tell folks, you know, we don't want folks who are here for the check, only for those who are here for the change. So therapy, case management, tattoo removal, as these gentlemen mentioned, curricular things, anger management, and such. But now it's more about, it's a community of healing. And if love is the answer, community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology. Tenderness is the thing that's foreign. Tenderness, as Jean Vanier says from the L'Arche communities, it's the highest form of spiritual maturity. If there are two kind of spiritualities that undergird Homeboy Industries, one is Ignatian and the other one is the L'Arche communities. The principle, of course, is that we're all called to be enlightened witnesses, people who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. We're allergic at Homeboy Industries to holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up, only because that's not the kind of God we have, so why would we choose to do it? We're not about measuring. We're about holding the mirror up and returning people to themselves, telling them the truth, that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And once you're out at the margins and you're telling this to each other with the use of mirrors, there's a nobility that gets born. Suddenly you become that truth. You inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No four prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it, because it's huge. But every one of us at Homeboy is always reaching in and dismantling the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. And that's the principal suffering of the poor throughout history, is shame and disgrace. We want to be people who live as in the Acts of the Apostles, when they have this very strange line in it that says simply, and awe came upon everyone, suggesting that the measure of our health as a Christian community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So some years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and I said yes, and I knew it was a gang in-service from 9 to 5. I figured I'd maybe open it or speak at lunch or close the thing. So getting closer to the date, I pull out the letter and I read the not-so-fine print, and it is a 9 to 5 gang in-service, but I am to be the only speaker for the entire day, which I hadn't realized. So I quickly invite two trainees in, Andre and Jose, and I sit them down and I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their story, so Jose gets up. He's about 25 years old at the time. And 18-month program like these two, but at the end of his time, he kind of became a very valued member of the substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger folks with their addiction issues. Gang member, felon, parolee, been to prison, tattooed. But he also had a long stretch of time as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And he says, it sounds way worse in Spanish, he said to them, We got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage. She knocks on the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt, because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. And so we go to the margins, not because we are superior or because we're called to rescue anybody. You go to the margins not to rescue, but once you find yourself out there, go figure, everybody gets rescued. Everybody is mutually noble. Everybody has inhabited the truth of who they are. And you brace yourselves when you go out there, because the world will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And you just go to the margins so that you can listen and hear their voices. Let me end with a story, and then we'll engage your questions over here at the table. We're all wanting to just somehow imitate the kind of God we believe in. God is compassionate, loving kindness. So all we're called to do really is to just be in the world who God is. If we choose to do that, then we're responding to God's hope, which is that my joy may be yours and your joy complete. That's what it looks like. And we want to be a church that is joyful. And kinship is the dream come true for God. And I believe it's the only praise that God has any interest in. Whoopi Goldberg was asked in a Q&A who was the living person she most admired, and I suppose she could have said a whole bunch of people, but she said Pope Francis. And then she added this, yeah, he's going with the original program. I love that. I think people want the original program, which is in the end to imitate the kind of God you believe in. Pope Francis calls his encyclical the joy of the gospel. It's not the grim duty of following Jesus, or not. It's not called the thrill of being Catholic. It's the joy of the gospel. So the trick is to find the marrow of the gospel and to choose to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And he only took 4 things seriously. They're big things, but it's only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, compassionate, loving kindness, which is unconditional, that's one thing, and acceptance. That's the original program. And that's where we want to be. A woman interviewed me on the Christian Broadcasting Network, and she said, you know, what we do at Homeboy, and I did the whole list from tattoo removal to therapy to job training to case management. I went on and on and on. At the end, she kind of made a face like she smelled something foul, and she said, yeah, but how much time do you spend each day at Homeboy Industries, you know, praising God? I didn't know what to say except all damn day. But I don't believe she liked that answer very much. But I think it's the original program. We want to stay close to this and close to the bone of the gospel where we take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And that's the only praise God has any interest in. So, last story. So, it occurs to universities sometimes, especially when they have forced their students to read my book against their will, to invite me, and I'm not complaining. So I went to I was invited by my alma mater, Gonzaga, undefeated, #1, and so I decided, sure, and they said, please bring 2 homies with you, and so I always do if they ask, and I try to pick homies to go in a kind of a very scientific way. I always pick homies who are from rival gangs just so that they'll have to share a hotel together, just hotel room, just to mess with them, and I always pick homies who've never flown before just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky, and we were we flew the other day, and I remember once I brought 2 homies from older guys, and we were flying to Washington, D.C., and very seriously said, are we flying Virgin because this is our first time? And I told them yes. Last week I was in Toledo and Cleveland with 2 homies, and one guy got up and he was just so thrilled. It was his first flight. He goes, damn, I've never flown overseas before. And we were in Toledo. So, I mean, so then I picked 2 homies, and Bobby, African-American gang member, worked in the bakery, and Mario, at the time, worked in our merchandise store. And well, I've done this so many times with men and women, hundreds and hundreds of times. I've never picked anybody more terrified of flying than this guy, Mario. I mean, he was just terrified. He was hyperventilating, you know, and we hadn't even gotten on the plane yet, you know, so we're at Burbank Airport, which is a kind of a smaller airport, big bay windows, Southwest Airlines mainly, and they don't have that hermetically sealed chute where you get on to get on the plane. You have to walk out onto the tarmac, and there are steps that, you know, lead to the front of the plane and steps that lead to the back of the plane, which is the big feature there. So we're sitting there, and it's early morning, and our plane arrives, and people are getting off the plane. And I said, Mario, that's our plane. I think he may die before we actually climb up those stairs. So I see at early morning, there are two flight attendants, females, and they both have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up those front steps to get into the plane. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" I go, "As soon as they sober up the pilots, there they go now." All right, so maybe I shouldn't have said that to him. So I should tell you that in my 30 years at Homeboy Industries, Mario is the most tattooed individual I've ever known. You know, he's totally sleeved out, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, and chin covered. And I'd never been in public with him, and so when we're walking through Burbank Airport, people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids more closely. And I think, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to ask anybody tomorrow at Homeboy, who's the kindest, most gentle soul, the most tender person who works here, they won't say me. They'll say Mario, who now works selling baked goods behind the counter. Kind, gentle, tender. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing that world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this happens often enough in universities, but never here at Holy Cross. I really thank you for this. But they'll have the big talk at night, and this was huge. It had like 2,000 people. But what they don't tell you is they've planned 93 other talks for you, you know, like this class, this lunch, this meeting, this class, all day long, you know. And so I tell these two guys, I'm not going to speak at any of these. I'm going to sit in the back of the room. I want you to get up and tell your stories. And so they do, and they're nervous, especially Mario, but they do such a good job. And stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So the nighttime talk comes, and it's just packed. And I said, look, I'll do my thing, but can you get up before, do a little 5-minute Polaroid, so that I can include you in the question and answer afterwards. And they're terrified, again, especially Mario, but they do it, and they do a good job. And I do my thing, and then, okay, yeah, questions. Yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. And the three of us are standing at the podium, and Mario steps to the microphone. He clutches it. Yes. And he's just terrified. Well, you say you have a son and a daughter, and they're both about to reach their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? Mario clutches the microphone, and I can feel him trembling, and I can feel the emotion sort of rising, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with this answer, when suddenly he blurts out, I just... And as soon as he says those two words, he retreats back to the microphone clutching, eyes closed retreat, and he's trembling all the more, and it feels like he's going to explode, but he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and it's her turn to cry now. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 2,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And they, in turn, were returned to him themselves, because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise God has any interest in. because that's the original program. That you may be one. That's it. The widow, orphan, and stranger, trustworthy guides to get us there. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so we choose all over again to make those voices heard. Thank you very much. That's yours. And questions, I know we have a microphone there, but it usually works well if you just go like this and I go like that. Otherwise,
I will ask them to go to the mic if they can do it. They can
Okay.
raise their hands, but we'll...
so
It's a
before
tough
we
one.
do that, if I could, is Malinka here? Malinka, raise your hand. There you are. She was born on this day. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Malinka. Happy birthday to you. This is like the old people in the audience remember kind of, I've got a secret, or one of those things, where your sister Anna, I know her, so she emailed me. She said, oh, her birthday is today. Sorry to have mortified you. All right, so fire away at questions.
So head up to the mic, don't be shy.
Here's my suggestion, because I do this so often, that only a certain kind of person is going to walk up to the microphone, because it's hard. The questions you want are seated in these chairs right now. So I'm going to try something if you don't mind. Okay? And if you can't hear it, I'm going to go ahead and repeat it. So you go like this, I go like that, yell it out. Trust me, it works better. Yes?
So you said you've been doing this for 30 years. How do you avoid burnout?
How do I avoid burnout after 30 years? Well, because I think part of the thing is, what is the thing that depletes us? If my job is to save these guys, then I would have burned out a long time ago. I was in Houston, and a hardcore gang intervention worker, former gang member, felon, pleading with me. How do you reach them? I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? So if my job is to reach these two, I will burn out. But if my job is to be reached by them, it's a whole different ballgame. It's ennobling, it's mutual. My life has changed completely, forever. Now that may sound selfish, and that's sort of the secret, is that it is. People go, wow, gosh, how do you do it? And I think, is it supposed to be hard? Because if you're saving the world, it's going to be hard. And you will be depleted, and you will burn out. But you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to receive people. You're supposed to allow yourself to be reached by people. And so the choice is save the world or savor the world. I vote for savor. And because if you choose savoring the world, I don't know how it works. The world gets saved if people are savoring it. If people are appreciating who people are. If you allow yourself to be reached by folks, then it's extraordinary what happens. Yes?
Sounds like that church in between the two housing projects that you pastored you get that job? Was that a short straw? Were you the short straw guy, or were you just there, or what?
That's a good question. So how did I end up at Dolores Mission? So I was ordained in 1984, and then I did a year of theology with the very Reverend Jim Hayes at Berkeley. And then, no, that's not right. Is that right? No, after 84, I went to Bolivia for a year. And then I came back, and then I did a year with the Reverend Jim Hayes in Berkeley to finish up my theology. But I had been invited to go to Santa Clara University to run their immersion program, which was kind of a new idea of 30-some years ago. And it wasn't enough for me, so Bolivia had sort of changed me. So I went to my provincial, Jack Clark, and I said, please don't send me to Santa Clara. It's just not enough. I mean, maybe Dolores Mission. He goes, oh my God, I need a pastor. The pastor just left there. So I was the youngest pastor in the history of the diocese there. So I was so ill-equipped. And I got there and I could barely speak Spanish and I didn't know anything, which again was a great gift because then the people had to lead because I couldn't do it. So yeah, it was fortuitous. I'm grateful. Yes.
How long did you stay pastor there?
I was there for 6 years, and then I did tertianship. 86 to 92, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah, what is the change that you two have had to make since joining the program?
The hardest,
Like the change that they've had
yeah.
to make?
What change have you had to do that was the hardest?
Accepting that working with an enemy, shaking hands with them every morning, telling them good morning, you know, it wasn't a thing I was used to. It wasn't something I used to be like, forget that, I ain't gonna shake that guy's hand, you know, he's my rival enemy, killed one of my homies before. That's something I had, once I walked through those doors, I had to accept that change that I wanted. That's about it.
I think the biggest challenge for me was accepting the fact that there's not going to be any more gangbanging in my life, because I still live in my neighborhood, and just to walk through and to realize that all it takes is one time to get high. All it takes is one time to kick with the homies and end up back in jail. Or all it takes is to be walking down the wrong street and someone I hurt back then or sees me and I'm dead, you know? So the biggest challenge is turning my back on all that and just live the life of a regular person now, you know? Because it's not only me no more, I got my daughter now, you know? So I gotta think for two and not just me, you know?
Yes, way back there.
So much brother, Ruben or Ruiz with it. So when I'm going off what you just said, you're back, you know, like the people that you used to hang out with, do they like judge you at all for doing Homeboy? Like that you kind of left that light?
My neighborhood,
Yeah, so what are the homies from your neighborhoods, do they judge you harshly? Do they talk masa to you?
to be honest, in the beginning they did, because I was one of those gang members where, like I said, my dad was in the neighborhood, so I was following his name. I was under his wing. So in the beginning I came strong. I was going tough, running amok. But then I guess what they say is weakness, the homie showing weakness, and one of those are that's a rule in the neighborhood that you can't do. You cannot show weakness, you can't say no. Yeah, I heard a lot of negativity, but not so long ago, I got in contact with my uncle again over a meeting in the neighborhood. It was just a prank. So they went, me and my uncle, we went at it one time, literally fought. And my homie comes and he shakes my hand and he's like, that's right on me, like you back, like, that's right, I thought we were gonna lose you, you know? And I looked at him and I was like, man, sorry for my language, but fuck this, you know, this is not me no more. This is not gang banging ain't me. You know, I like being sober, having fun, seeing things, being here with you guys. And my uncle looks at me and he just joy, and I see a tear coming down. A man that's making calls in the neighborhood, all tattooed up. You know, people are that fear him. Is not, they don't love him, they fear him. And he looks at me and he grabs me and he holds me and he's like, "Damn, Mijo, like, you changing, you know, like, you're a different guy since you got in the neighborhood." And he gave me what they call props, you know, appreciate. I guess somebody that I did it, you know, is something weak to them, but to me it's a blessing. It's the biggest change in my life, and I will never regret.
Yeah, actually, I do get a lot of negativity from the homies that are around my age, because I'm not too much older than you know, I'm only 20 years old, and everybody in my generation are still out there getting high and out of jail, you know, and sometimes they're hitting me up and they're like, "Man, what's up with you?" You know, excuse my language, but they're like, "Stop bullshitting already, you know. That ain't true, you know, stop working, you're gonna fucking fall back and you're gonna come back home, you know." But it's something I gotta ignore, because that's not what I want in my life no more. Misery loves company, and I'm done with all that, having no one to go to, and those lonely nights in the streets, because I found out that your closest friend would forget about you in a quick second once you're in jail or you're gone, you know? And the person that really needs me is the one that's gonna be losing out, you know? So at the end of the day, it really don't matter what anybody says. It's all about what you want to do with your life, you know?
It's a little bit like a drug rehab, you know. If you used to shoot heroin and then you went to drug rehab and you run into somebody who you used to shoot with, and she is currently shooting up, she doesn't hate you because you went to rehab. She may say, "Yeah, good for you. I'm not quite ready to do that," but it's more akin to that than anything else. So there's a lot of misunderstandings that, you know, that these guys are hunted men or something, you know, and the truth is 93% of all gang members want what these guys have, which is a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gang bang the night before, and they just want their kids to call them daddy, you know. That's what they want. Everybody wants that. But it takes people a while. Our program is not for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. And it takes what it takes for somebody to walk through our doors. You know, the birth of a son or daughter, or the death of a friend, or a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes in recovery. No amount of me wanting that gang member to have a life will ever be the same as that one wanting to have one. Yes, sir.
How long did it take for you to look at your enemy in a different way?
How long did it take for them to look at their enemy in a different way?
Well, I don't know the exact time, but once I was in jail and I'm shaking hands with an enemy because I had to, that moment, it just, like I said, it hit me. Why would I be out there shooting at somebody knowing that I could be doing life in jail for the rest of my life, and if I get caught? So that day, it changed me. Walking in those doors at Homeboy Industries changed me. That's it.
That's actually a good question, because well, the way I found out that I went to this home when I got out of jail, right? It's for a bunch of parolees, and I walk into this room, and my bunkie was my rival gang member, you know, and I'm like, man, like, oh, hell no, this ain't gonna work, you know? So he comes up to me, he shakes my hand, he tells me where he's from, and I'm like, damn, you know? So he's like, hey man, what's up? You working this and that? And he's talking to me, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, man, fool, if you don't get away from me, dog. But he tells me, what's up? You ever been to Homeboy Industries? This and that. This is before I actually walked into the doors and, got my job. And he's like, let's go together, So we started going together and we started talking more and more and more. And we got hired together. And he actually became a real good friend of mine and still is. He was actually one of the first cholos to ever hold my baby, He's walking into my house now, and we text every day. We just got off the phone literally like probably an hour ago, And yeah, Miami became one of my best friends, So.
And you can't demonize people you know. That's kind of impossible. Yes, back there. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Father Boyle, and I'm sorry I came in a little bit late, so I didn't catch the two homies' names, but blessed really to receive you guys tonight. Really gracious to hear from you. My question is for Father Boyle. Right now, in the midst of our country, some would say we're in the biggest racial tension, probably even since the civil rights era. You well entrenched in your community to be able to go out and deal with the homeless. You have some of that clout, so to speak. What wisdom, I love how you said that, what wisdom would you share with someone who has a heart and desire to reach out to that community that doesn't actually look like their community, especially in this day and time?
Yeah, I think the more so the question is about how do you reach out and to as somebody who doesn't look like somebody from particular communities. I mean, it's a question I get a fair amount, I think our tendency is the more we can, if no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no equality. So we're endlessly disqualifying ourselves. I couldn't possibly relate, we say that's the word we use, relate to gang members. Because I'm not a gang member, and I'm not Latino, and I'm not African American, and I've never been to prison except as a chaplain, and I don't own a tattoo, But that's just that's a problem because it's a human thing. So if you're the proud owner of a pulse, then you can connect to other human beings. And that's the great discovery. What happens is that we think it's about something I have to impart to them. And because I have to tell them something, step aside, let me handle this. I'm a gang member. I used to be there. I've been there, done that. I know this. Step aside, let me handle it. If the task is for a person to talk to them and to tell them stuff and to grab them by the lapel and say, don't you see, it'd probably be better if it was a gang member who did that. But that's, of course, not the task. Fortunately for everybody in this room, the task is not to tell them anything. The task is to allow yourself to be reached by them. The task is to receive them. The task is to listen to them. And because that's the task, everybody can do it. But the more it becomes rarefied and narrow, that's the sign of unhealth in any community, I think. Any entity that says, step aside, let me handle this, I'm going in there, it's a tough job, somebody's got to, no. Whenever it's overdramatic, rarefied, narrow, it's unhealthy. And that happens in a lot of cities. The more it's all hands on deck, find me somebody who couldn't be a beneficial presence to everything that ails us in the inner city, you wouldn't be able to find somebody. Once it's expansive and spacious like the God we have, then suddenly it's a game changer. Lately, though, I've been taking to thinking that as bad as we think things are, they're never as bad as they used to be. Never. In fact, every single day, more progress. Even people like, and I'll include myself, who are kind of desolate, at the prospects of some prospects, it's still, we're not, so nothing is worse. Nothing is worse today than it was yesterday. It just isn't. And people who are nostalgic for, if somebody said to me, I just want to return to what life was like when I was growing up. Well, when I was growing up, people sat in the back of the bus. Why would we ever want to go back to anything that happened 3 days ago, much less 50 years ago? It doesn't make any sense. But we're making progress in the good every day, even if it doesn't feel like it. And nothing is worse today than it was yesterday. Everything is better today than it was yesterday. How about one last question? Way back there, yes, because I'd called on you before and now.
I wanted to ask the homies, what made them trust Father G, and what made you guys feel like you could go to Homeboy?
What made you trust me, and what made you feel like you could go to Homeboy? I'm just repeating that for anybody else here.
What made me trust him was, because I know I didn't say this, but when I was a baby, my dad shot and killed himself. So I never really had a father figure, you know. I looked up to my cousins and stuff because that's what I wanted to be, you know. I wanted to be that gang member that everybody feared, you know. But so I really never let anybody out of my family into my life, you know. Nothing. So walking into those doors, I expected to meet some boss guy sitting behind a desk. It's like, all right, what do you want now, you know? But that wasn't the case. I walked in, and he told me, what is it that I can do for you, son? And he sat there and listened to my problems and listened to everything I had to say. And after that, he gave me a hug and helped me with everything I needed. And that's something that I've never had before, you know, especially from a male figure. And after that, our relationship has continued to grow ever since. And I feel glad I can call him a father, you know, and I do trust him with everything.
Thank you.
Me, when I came in Homeboy Industries, I didn't know who was Father G. Once they pointed him out to me, I was like, really? That's G right there? And it's not in a bad way, just like, I'm over here, in my mind, I'm like, oh, he's Hispanic. You might call him G-Dog for a reason, right? Like, he might be from the neighborhood too, you know, just like me. I seen him, I was like, damn, you know, shocked. And I was like, I seen him hugging everybody. I was like, damn, everybody respects him, you know. Then it was my turn to go in. So I sat down right in front of him, and he didn't take his eyes off of me, you know. He just, same thing. Hey, son, what happened? What you need? What you here for? I'm here for a job. I want a job. I want to change my life. I'm here to change. I'm ready. Open arms. Didn't hesitate. Didn't judge me by the way I was dressed in the beginning, because I did not look like this when I came in Homeboy Industries. My pants were baggy. My shirt was like 2 sizes bigger than my size. Hat on, bandana on my left side. It wasn't me who I am now, you know. All bald-headed. He didn't judge me for who I was. Not one moment. He just said, yes, start tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Can you do that? And I was like, damn, really? Like, a guy from different race, you know, that's gonna trust me like that and not judge me by the way I look. It was amazing. I felt love out of sight. Like I said, like he says, kinship. Helped me out like nothing, not even knowing me, not even going to deep stories in my life. That's it.
Let me just finish with this. I think part of what our tendency in the city is to deliver services. So we all have the same menu. And anywhere I go, you know, anger management, parenting, you know, job training, everything. It's the same menu of delivery of delivery of services. And so then it becomes like the DMV, you know, and now serving number 49, you know, and with an attitude. And so, but it's not about the delivery of services, and it's not about those menu items. We do all those at Homeboy Industries. It's only about the community. And it's about creating a community of tenderness, because every gang member who walks through our doors is carrying this enormous weight of this chronic, massive stress. And unless you can they can find some alivio, as we say in Spanish, in that community, they're never going to be able to re-identify who they are in the world. And if they can't do that, these guys, have re-identified themselves. So now they go out after the 18 months with us, and now the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled by it. And that's the big difference. And so a homie came into my office named Jermaine, 30 years old, African-American gang member, and he had been working at Homeboy for about 4 months. And Homeboy is like the Discovery Channel. Every day you're discovering something because you're allowed to do that with the stress relieved in a place that holds you tenderly. And you can hang on to that tenderness. It doesn't just hold you. You can hang on to it. You can hold on to it as well. So he comes into my office and he said, I discovered something today. So he tells me that when he was 9 years old, he was sitting in front of the TV watching it, lying on his stomach, and he could tell from his peripheral vision somebody had walked in. He turns around and he sees his mom. She's standing in the doorway. She's not saying anything. As he brings focus to her, he sees that her arms are outstretched and she has profoundly and deeply slit her wrists, and blood is coursing onto the floor. And then she says to her 9-year-old boy, "See what you made me do." Well, the next day, he was taken from her care and put into the foster care system. Quite telling and disturbing and tragic is that his other 2 sibs, a boy and a girl, weren't taken from her care. Only him, which seemed to underscore the thing you would never want to underscore. That was at 9. At 13, he got jumped into a gang. At 17, he was raised the rest of the way by incarceration. And he comes to Homeboy and he's 30 years old and he's there 4 months and he's sitting in my office and he's told me that story. Now he's just sobbing uncontrollably. And he says, and here's what I discovered. I discovered today that I had always preferred my rage to my shame. And because he made that discovery in a community of tenderness that held him, for the first time in his life, he was able to forgive his mother for having been mentally ill and forgive himself for having once been a 9-year-old boy. And the soul feels its worth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. Yeah, it's about Jesus. Yeah, it's about Christmas. But how is it not your job description as human beings? You appear, the soul feels its worth, not because you've come to the rescue, but because you have allowed yourself to be reached by somebody who's carried more than you have. And that leaves everybody feeling worthy. Thank you all very much.